The council chamber was filled with the sounds of many voices, and every voice carried a different tone, and yet all of them had one thing in common, and that was unease because the name of humans had been spoken again. And whenever the name of humans was spoken in that chamber, the air turned heavy and no one could ignore it, because the story of humanity was not like the story of other young races, and the memory of the last council meeting where the humans had walked out still burned in the minds of every leader who sat around the long circular hall. And even though none of them wanted to admit it openly, there was fear behind their eyes, because for the first time in centuries, a new species had not bowed to their authority and had instead chosen to turn away. The tall figures of alien lords shifted in their seats while the glow of the council lights reflected on their polished skins and sharp features, and one of them, a scaled creature from the distant Varick systems, leaned forward and whispered to another that it was madness to let the humans go unchecked, and yet no one had stopped them when they rose from their seats and left the chamber. And this was the strange power of humans, that even in their silence they left a mark that forced others to question themselves. And now, as the chamber filled with quiet arguments and hissing debates, the echo of that moment still lingered, and it was clear to all that something had changed forever. But the story of how the council reached this point did not begin with fear. It began with arrogance, because when the humans first arrived, they were seen as nothing more than fragile creatures from a death world. And that word death world carried weight in the galaxy, because planets like Earth were rare and dangerous, and most species that crawled out of such places either perished or became monsters. And yet the humans had not only survived, but they had thrived. And when they first appeared before the council, led by a man named Daniel Ross and a woman named Claire Morgan, many laughed quietly behind their masks and screens, because they thought these newcomers would accept whatever place was given to them. Daniel Ross was not a man who carried himself with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the quiet strength of someone who had lived through storms and had learned how to stand tall in them. He wore a simple dark suit with the crest of Earth upon it, and he walked with calm steps that did not falter even when dozens of alien eyes studied him with cold intensity. And beside him, Claire Morgan moved with sharp grace, her eyes scanning the chamber with the precision of someone who trusted nothing and no one. And behind them walked a small team of human delegates, all chosen for their skills, but none of them more important than the two who led them. The chamber was designed to make visitors feel small, with high walls and a dome that stretched into the clouds with banners of empires that had lasted thousands of years yet. When Daniel and Claire stepped into it, they did not slow down or bow their heads. And this small act was enough to make murmurs rise from the seats above, and already the mood began to shift, because these humans did not enter like petitioners, they entered like equals. And the council noticed a booming voice called the chamber to order, and the great council began with the ritual words of welcome. But beneath those words were hidden meanings, and challenges the oldest species asked if humanity was prepared to submit to the laws that had bound the galaxy together for eons. And Daniel answered with a calm tone that Earth respected law and order, but would not accept change. The words sounded simple, but in a chamber where every syllable was measured like a blade. His reply was sharper than most of the aliens expected, and Claire caught the narrowing of several alien eyes as they understood that this new species had come not as servants, but as partners. For the first hour, the debates followed their usual path, filled with questions about trade, about security, about cultural rights, and every question was asked in a way that assumed humans were desperate to join, and that they would agree quickly. But Daniel answered each with patience and firmness, refusing to bend when unfair demands were placed. And when a lord of the Zral Empire spoke with disdain and called humans reckless creatures from a cursed planet, Daniel did not rise in anger. He only leaned forward and reminded the chamber that humanity had faced disasters that would have erased many other species, and yet they still stood stronger than ever. And there was a quiet silence after those words, because even the proudest of empires could not deny the resilience in them. Claire watched the room carefully. She saw the whispers, the shifting expressions, the quiet fear that some tried to hide, and she knew the truth that the council had underestimated them already, and that fear would grow. With each moment they spoke, Daniel kept his voice calm and steady, but every word struck deeper, and slowly, the arrogance in the chamber began to weaken, replaced by the first spark of unease. The debate stretched, on for hours, and every time the council tried to corner the humans with demands, Daniel turned their words back with reason and with the quiet steel in his voice. But arrogance does not die easily, and some alien leaders grew frustrated until one of them slammed his clawed hand upon the desk and shouted that humans were nothing, that they were fragile, that they were unworthy of standing among them. And in that moment the chamber roared with mixed voices, some agreeing, some shaking their heads, and Claire thought for a moment that Daniel would lose his temper. But he did not. He only rose from his seat, and his voice echoed through the hall, when he said that Earth had not come to kneel, and if the council wanted only servants, then humanity would walk away. The words cut through the noise like a blade, and silence fell across the chamber. Every leader stared at Daniel Ross, and none of them spoke, because they had never been challenged in such a way before. Not by a species so young, not by a people who had only just arrived among the stars, and yet there he stood with Claire beside him, her eyes sharp and unblinking, and behind them their team silent and steady. And in that silence the power shifted, because the council realized that the humans were not bluffing and that they were willing to leave. The silence stretched long until the speaker of the council tried to smooth the moment with polished words, but Daniel did not sit down again. He only looked at Claire and gave the slightest nod, and then he turned toward the great doors and began to walk away, and the human team followed him step by step, their footsteps echoing through the hall while the alien leaders watched in shock and disbelief, and Claire could feel the weight of their stares burning into her back as she walked beside Daniel, and yet she did not falter, because this was the choice they had prepared for. The doors opened slowly and the humans walked through them, and when they closed, behind them the chamber erupted into chaos. Some shouted that humans were arrogant fools, others whispered that perhaps it was the council who had been blind, and in the noise that filled the room, the truth became clear that something had happened that none of them could ignore anymore, because a young race had come to the council, and when they refused to be broken they had walked away, and the galaxy would never forget it. Outside the chamber, the human team moved in silence through the long corridors lit by alien lights, and when they finally reached the transport that would take them back to their ship, Claire looked at Daniel and asked softly if he was certain about what he had done, and Daniel only gave a small nod, his face calm, but his eyes carrying the weight of the decision, and he said that sometimes the only way to be heard was to walk away, and that the council would remember this moment far longer than any speech. And Claire knew he was right, because even now the chamber was still shaking from the choice they had made, and the story of that choice was only just beginning. The human delegation left the council chamber behind, and the silence of the corridors felt heavier than any words that had been spoken inside, and yet none of them faltered, because Daniel Ross walked with calm steps, and Claire Morgan kept her eyes sharp as always, watching the shadows and the guards who lingered along the passage. The alien escorts did not speak either, because even they felt the weight of what had just happened. And when the humans reached their transport, they entered, quickly, and the doors closed with a hiss, and the vessel began to move through the shining city that surrounded the council halls, and every member of the team remained quiet for a long while, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just taken place. Daniel sat near the front, looking out of the window at the towering spires of alien design stretching into the skies. He thought about the faces of the council members, about the pride that had filled the chamber, and about the silence that followed his words, and he knew that choice had changed everything. Humanity had walked away from the table, and in doing so they had shown the galaxy that they would not bend. And though the decision carried risk, it also carried strength, because sometimes the act of refusing was louder than any agreement. Claire sat opposite him, her hands folded together, her gaze steady on him as if searching for any crack in his calm. But she saw none. She only saw the quiet fire in his eyes when they returned to their ship waiting in orbit above the shining capital. The crew greeted them with anxious eyes. Everyone had been following the debate through the feeds, and everyone knew it had ended in silence and withdrawal. Some asked Daniel if there had been a mistake, but he only shook his head and said that no mistake had been made. Earth would not kneel. Claire repeated his words to those who asked later, and soon the message spread across the ship and beyond, because the council was already broadcasting the outcome across the galaxy, and the news carried shock everywhere that heard it. The humans had walked away, and they had done it with steady steps and unshaken voices. On distant colonies, whispers began to rise, some alien traitors who had dealt with humans began to wonder if the council had overplayed their hand. Others scoffed at the idea and said humans were foolish to reject the seat they were offered. Yet even they could not deny that a strange unease had begun to creep through the trade routes, because humans were more than just another species. They were builders, they were explorers. They had already formed bonds with smaller races who admired their courage, and now that bond seemed stronger because of the stand that had just been made. Daniel called a meeting with his close team aboard the ship. He spoke of patience and of the need to show strength without aggression. He reminded them that the Council had wanted Earth to accept terms that would have chained humanity to the whims of ancient empires, but Earth had chosen freedom. Instead, he spoke of history and of the many times humans had faced overwhelming odds, yet had still survived, and his words reminded every listener of why they had followed him here. Claire watched the faces of the crew as they listened, and she saw resolve grow in them again. And she knew that Daniel had not just walked out of the council chamber, he had walked into history. Meanwhile, in the great capital, the council did not rest. The leaders argued long into the night about what had happened. Some shouted that the humans had insulted them and should be punished. Others warned that such action would be dangerous, because no one truly knew the full measure of what humans could. A few voices whispered that perhaps the humans had been right and that arrogance had blinded them. Those voices were quickly silenced, but the doubt remained, and doubt was a poison that spread quietly through even the strongest walls. Reports began to flow in from the edges of the empires. Pirates who had once been cautious now grew bold, sensing that the council was distracted. Small colonies began to complain that without human traders and advisors, their systems were weakening. Supply chains broke down where humans had once been the connectors, and the council began to see the first cracks in their perfect order. Daniel and Claire received these reports through channels, and they read them in silence, both understanding what they meant. Earth had more influence than the council wanted to admit, and without humans the balance was already shifting. Claire walked the halls of the ship at night, thinking of the faces she had seen in the council chamber, the way their eyes had shifted when Daniel spoke and the way silence had fallen when they stood to leave. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind, and each time she felt a strange mix of pride and unease, because pride came from knowing humanity had shown strength, but unease came from not knowing what the council might do in response. Still, she trusted Daniel, and his calm steadiness was like an anchor for the entire crew. Days passed, and the broadcasts from the council grew sharper. Their voices accused humans of arrogance, of short-sighted pride, yet hidden between those words was a quiet desperation. Because the galaxy had begun to ask what would happen if humans never returned. Smaller races that had always lived in the shadow of the great empires now looked to Earth with a new kind of hope they saw in humanity. Not just defiance, but the possibility of change. Daniel knew this, and when he gathered his team again, he reminded them that they were not alone. The galaxy was watching, and sometimes, example was more powerful than armies in one quiet night. Daniel stood at the observation deck looking down at the blue-white curve of the planet below the council capital, and Claire joined him. She asked him softly if he thought they would call humanity back, and Daniel answered that they would, but not out of respect, out of need, because already the cracks were spreading and the empires feared chaos more than they hated pride. Claire listened and nodded because she too had seen the signs, and she too knew the truth that it was only a matter of time before the council came searching for them again. Far from the council halls on distant colonies, ships of smaller races began to visit human stations more frequently. They carried messages of quiet support, they carried goods for trade, and with each visit the bond between Earth and the small voices of the galaxy grew stronger. Daniel welcomed them with patience and fairness, and his calm tone made even the most cautious feel at ease. And slowly, without grand declarations, humanity was becoming a symbol not just of defiance but of choice. The choice to stand and walk away when the price of bending was too high. In the council chamber, the debates turned to desperation as more reports arrived of trade disruptions, of border conflicts, of pirates uniting under banners that had been silent for decades. One by one, the leaders realized that the absence of humanity was not an empty gesture. It was a weight that grew heavier with every Passing day, and the whisper began to spread through even the proudest voices that perhaps they had made a mistake. Perhaps they had underestimated the humans, and when those whispers reached the speaker of the council, even he could not deny the unease growing in his own heart. But for Daniel and Claire aboard their ship orbiting the capital world, the focus remained steady. They did not rush. They did not beg. They did not chase. They waited, and in that waiting was their strength. Because the longer they remained silent, the louder their choice became. And as the stars turned above them, the galaxy began to realize that the humans were not the ones in need. It was the council that would soon be begging for their return. The weeks after the humans left the council chamber were filled with tension across the galaxy, and every day brought new reports that showed how fragile the balance of power truly was without them. Daniel Ross spent long hours in the command center of the ship, listening to the updates that came from human colonies and from the smaller races that now reached out more often than before. He listened with calm patience, taking in the signs of unrest and change, and he saw clearly what many in the council tried to deny, that the choice to walk away had already set events into motion that could not easily be undone. Claire Morgan was never far from him, moving between the crew and the diplomats who traveled with them, keeping spirits steady and reminding everyone that they had chosen the harder path because it was the right one. In the council chamber, arguments never seemed to end, and the proud voices of the ancient empires grew sharper every day. Some demanded that a fleet be sent to Earth to force submission. Others warned that such action would ignite a war that none of them were prepared to fight. And between those voices there were quieter ones that asked if perhaps the mistake had been theirs all along. But pride held the chamber hostage, and even those who secretly agreed that the humans had been treated unfairly refused to say it openly. Yet the unease was growing clearer with every report, because trade lanes once kept steady by human mediators were breaking apart, and small conflicts were turning into battles on the edges of empires. One evening, Daniel stood with Claire on the bridge as a new message arrived from a distant colony, not of Earth, but of a minor species who had always been ignored by the council. The message was short, but desperate. They asked for human advisors to return. They begged for human ships to patrol their borders, because already raiders had begun to strike and their old protectors did nothing. Daniel listened to the plea, and when the screen went dark, he turned to Claire and told her softly that this was only the beginning, because the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to push away the one ally who never asked for tribute, but only for respect. Claire agreed, and her sharp eyes carried a quiet fire, because she could see the pattern as clearly as he did. The crew of the human ship felt the change too. When they moved through ports and stations, they were greeted with different eyes. Once there had been suspicion and mockery. Now there was respect and even admiration. Captains of small freighters saluted them in passing voices, whispered blessings when they walked by, and young aliens who had never before dared to approach humans now stepped forward with shy questions about Earth and its people. Daniel answered with patience and told them that Earth was not perfect, but Earth never stopped fighting for survival, and those words carried more weight than grand speeches, because they were spoken with honesty. Meanwhile, the council watched these shifts with unease and tried to tighten their control. They issued proclamations declaring that humanity was unstable. They warned smaller races that siding with Earth would bring ruin. But the words did not carry the same power as they once did, because those who had seen humans with their own eyes knew the truth. And the truth was that humanity was steady. Even when others shook, Daniel received copies of those proclamations, and he only smiled, faintly saying to Claire that the louder they shouted, the more it meant they were afraid. Claire nodded, and told him that fear was spreading faster than any fleet could travel. New challenges came to the humans directly. A delegation from a distant world asked to meet aboard their ship. They were nervous and humble, and when they sat before Daniel and Claire, they admitted that they feared the collapse of their alliances, and they asked if Earth would guide them. Daniel did not promise them protection with fleets or armies. He simply told them that Earth would stand beside those who wished to stand on their own, and the delegation left with relief in their eyes, because they had been given not chains, but dignity. And that dignity was what they craved most far away in the council chamber. The debates reached a breaking point. Some leaders could no longer deny that the galaxy was shifting beneath their feet. One argued that the humans must be invited back at once. Another spat, in fury that to beg them would be shameful, and still another whispered that perhaps shame was better than chaos. The voices clashed until the chamber shook with their anger. But even in their noise, the truth was forming silently. The galaxy needed the humans more than it wished to admit, and the moment of choice was drawing closer every day. On the human ship, the crew carried on with calm routine. Yet under that calm, they all sensed the gravity of their place in history. Daniel walked among them with steady steps, speaking with engineers and officers with the same ease he spoke to diplomats. He reminded them that patience was their weapon, now that silence was more powerful than any fleet, and Claire repeated his words among the younger crew when doubt tried to take root. She told them that history was watching and that they had already proven their strength by walking away. Now they must prove it again, by waiting. Nights aboard the ship grew long as the stars drifted past the observation windows. Daniel often stood there alone, watching the silent glow of the galaxy and thinking of Earth, of the people back home who did not yet see the ripples spreading across the stars. He thought of the council and of the look in their eyes when he rose from his seat, and he knew that moment would echo for generations. He felt the weight of it, but he did not regret it. For even as uncertainty loomed, he understood that sometimes it was the refusal to bend that shaped destiny more than victories. In battle, Claire often joined him in those hours, and sometimes they spoke quietly of what might come. She asked him once if he feared the council might send fleets in anger, and Daniel answered that if they did, the galaxy would finally see the council for what it was, and if they did not, then their silence was its own defeat. Either way, humanity would endure. Claire held his gaze and nodded because she trusted his calm. She trusted that steady fire that never wavered, and it gave her strength too. The weeks turned into months, and the unrest grew deeper. Trade wars erupted in regions once stable. Empires whispered of rebellion within their own ranks. Pirates who had once hidden in shadows now commanded entire routes, and everywhere voices began to murmur the same question: what if the humans never came back? What if the council had driven away the one species that could have balanced the storm? Daniel read these reports each day with quiet focus, and each day he knew the answer was becoming clearer. The galaxy would learn that humans were not the ones in need. It was the others who could not stand without them. And so the story moved steadily toward the moment that would change everything. The council had laughed when humans walked away, but laughter had turned to whispers, and whispers had turned to fear, and soon fear would turn to pleas, because the truth was written across the stars already, and Daniel Ross and Claire Morgan both knew it was only a matter of time before the proud voices that once mocked them would bow their heads and ask them to return. The station grew quieter as the cycle turned and lights dimmed across the long halls, and the alien veteran stayed awake while most others slept, because memories like his did not rest, and the hum of the machines seemed to mix with the echoes of the past that lived inside his mind. And he knew that no matter how much time passed, the truth about humans would never leave him, because their presence had marked him deeply. And Alex found himself wandering again, unable to rest, and his steps carried him back to the chamber where the old veteran sat watching the endless stars. And when Alex entered, the veteran did not turn, because he had expected him, and he said softly that humans never let go once they wanted answers. And Alex agreed, and asked him for more stories because he felt there was more hidden that had not yet been shared. The veteran leaned forward with eyes that seemed tired but alive, and he began to tell another tale, one from a battlefield carved into the rocks of a world with storms that could tear steel apart. And yet the humans had come there without fear because they had been told it was impossible to hold, and the Empire thought the humans would break quickly, but instead they dug into the ground and built shelters out of nothing more than scrap and stone. And they stayed through storms and through hunger and through darkness, and when the enemy came, they fought with a madness that was not madness, but something far stronger. And the veteran said that he had seen them rise from the mud with faces blackened by soot and eyes that still burned. And he realized then that humans did not need perfect ground to fight on, because they made any ground their own. Alex listened closely and asked what happened when the storms grew worse, and the veteran said that even then the humans did not leave, and instead they used the storms as cover and struck out of the wind and lightning like shadows with blades and fire, and every strike drove the enemy back further, and the veteran admitted that his people had never seen such resilience, and that even their strongest warriors had begun to fear the sight of humans moving through storm and flame like they belonged there. And Alex shivered at the thought and felt pride rise in him too, because it was his people the veteran spoke of. The veteran then shared another memory, and his voice grew lower because it was about prisoners once more, and he said that when his people captured a group of humans, they had prepared to see them broken. But instead the humans sang, and the sound filled the cells until even the guards could hear it. And at first they thought it was strange, but then they realized the humans were singing for each other and for themselves, and the songs carried hope through the walls, and the guards began to avoid listening because the sound unsettled them. And the veteran said that was when he understood that even without weapons, humans could still fight, because their will itself became a weapon, and it spread through others like fire through dry grass. Alex asked why such small acts frightened them, and the veteran said that it was because most species collapsed in silence when taken captive, but humans grew louder and stronger in spirit, and it made it clear that no chains could fully hold them. And the realization was more dangerous than blades, because it meant humans could resist forever. And Alex stayed silent, thinking about it, because he knew he would have done the same if placed in that cell, and he wondered if that was why humans always found a way to endure, because they carried each other even in the darkest moments. More crew began to gather again, drawn by the words of the veteran, and they sat around him quietly listening, and one asked what the veteran feared most about humans, and he replied without pause that what he feared most was their hope, because hope made them unstoppable, and hope carried them when strength failed, and hope gave them reasons to fight when logic said they should surrender. And he said that he had seen hope turn the tide of battles, and had seen hope drive men and women to stand even when nothing was left. And it was hope that haunted him more than fire or steel, because nothing could take it away from them. Alex looked at the others and saw their faces, and he could tell that they were struck by the weight of those words, and some eyes held awe, while others held fear, because they finally began to understand why humans were different. And Alex himself felt the heaviness in his chest, and he whispered that perhaps this was why humans were always seen with fear. And the veteran nodded slowly and said that fear was not always a curse, because fear could keep others from mistakes, but he warned that fear could grow into hate, and hate into war. And so humans would always walk the edge between being respected and being hunted. And Alex thought long about that as the room grew quiet. When he finally left the chamber, he walked the long halls, and the hum of the station seemed louder now, like the sound of a great heart beating far away. And he knew the truths he had heard would not leave him, and that the chilling truth about fighting humans was not only that they would never fall in battle, but that they would never fall in spirit, and that made them both the most dangerous and the most unbreakable beings the galaxy had ever known. The day began with a low hum in the alien station, and the veteran sat by the window watching the stars drift slowly past. And he thought again about the humans he had faced, and how every encounter had left him unsettled, because their courage was not just in battle but in the way they lived. And he remembered a human named Kevin who had led a small team across a ravaged battlefield with nothing but determination and a few scraps of equipment, and how Kevin had inspired others to keep moving when everything seemed lost. And he told Alex that humans like Kevin carried an invisible force that turned fear into energy and despair into action. And Alex nodded slowly, trying to imagine such resolve because he had heard stories. But seeing it through the veteran's words made it real. The veteran recalled a night when his squad was trapped in ruins and waiting for reinforcements that would never come. And he said that humans had appeared out of nowhere from the wreckage of storms, and debris carrying their wounded and holding the enemy at bay with fire and skill and clever traps that no one had thought possible. And he said that at first his squad had tried to intercept them, thinking that it was an easy target, but the humans moved with precision and timing that was impossible to predict, and soon his squad found itself retreating with heavy losses, because humans had turned the chaos of the ruined city into a weapon. And Alex shivered, imagining the sight of humans moving through rubble and fire like shadows and flames. The veteran went on to describe another human named Linda, who had been responsible for guiding civilians through the chaos of invasion, and how she had organized them to survive storms, to gather food from poisoned ground, and to use their environment to protect themselves and others. And he said that even the smallest humans could become leaders when necessity demanded it. And Alex listened closely because he realized that leadership in humans was born not from rank or title but from the need to act when no one else would. And that made every human potentially a force multiplier in battle or survival situations. Alex asked the veteran about the Empire and how they had tried to counter humans, and the veteran said that at first the Empire thought brute force would work and then thought strategy alone would break them. But every time the Empire advanced, the humans adapted faster than expected, and every tactic became a lesson for them to improve on. And the veteran admitted that his commanders began to fear not only the human strength, but their ability to learn and evolve, and to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. And he said that it was that adaptability that made humans almost impossible to predict and almost impossible to defeat. The veteran described the first time he had seen a human soldier heal a comrade under fire, and how the human had used improvised tools and simple materials to save a life that should have been lost, and how he had watched in disbelief as the human continued fighting afterward as if nothing had happened. And Alex felt the tension in that story because it showed not only skill, but determination and compassion working together, and he realized that humans were dangerous not only because of their weapons, but because of what they could inspire in each other and in others around them. The stories continued, and the veteran spoke of civilians who became warriors when their homes were threatened, and of soldiers who carried their wounded for miles across broken ground, and of medics who risked everything to save others. And he said that each time he saw such acts, he learned a little more about the human will, and a little more about how dangerous they could be. And Alex thought about the future of humans in the galaxy, and how others would underestimate them at their own peril. And he understood that the veteran's warnings were not exaggeration, but the truth carried by experience and survival. He told Alex that humans seemed to thrive on challenges that would break other species, and that even when faced with impossible odds, they found ways to fight back and adapt and survive. And sometimes, the veteran had felt anger at their resilience because it meant that no battle could ever be fully predicted, and no victory would be easy. And he said that humans carried the unpredictability of nature itself, and that the galaxy had not faced anything like it before. As the veteran spoke, more crew gathered to listen because his words carried a weight of truth, and they felt the seriousness of his warnings because they could hear the fear and respect in his voice. And Alex saw that his peers now understood why humans were both admired and feared, and he felt the heaviness of responsibility for being one of them. And the veteran said that humans fought not only for themselves but for each other and for their world, and that made them unstoppable because even when they seemed small and weak, their will was infinite and their courage was unmatched. Alex stayed silent, thinking about all the humans he knew and all the stories he had heard, and he felt both pride and awe because he realized that the galaxy had never truly understood what humans were capable of, and that only those who faced them directly could begin to comprehend it. And the veteran leaned back and closed his eyes and said that he would never forget the lessons he had learned, and that every soldier who faced humans carried the same truth in their memory. And Alex understood that it was a truth that would never fade, and that humans would always remain a force the galaxy could never fully measure or control. The final night in the station passed slowly, as the veteran sat quietly by the observation window and watched the stars drift past in endless silence, and he remembered all the battles and all the humans he had faced, and he felt a strange mix of fear and awe because even after years and countless encounters, they still held the same spirit that had made them so difficult to fight. And Alex returned once more and sat across from him, asking if there was more to tell, because the young human could sense the weight of truth that the veteran carried, and the veteran nodded slowly and began to speak with a voice that trembled at moments from memory and exhaustion. And he said that humans were not only dangerous on battlefields, but dangerous in life because every struggle they faced only made them stronger and wiser. And he told Alex about a soldier named Ryan who had faced overwhelming odds and had survived through courage and cleverness and sheer endurance, and he said that watching Ryan fight had changed the way he saw conflict forever. The veteran told of a day when humans had been surrounded on a broken world with no hope of rescue and no supplies, and yet they had built traps and fortifications from debris and fought in ways that no one had anticipated. And even when his own people thought the humans would fall, they pushed back again and again until the battle shifted and the humans had turned despair into advantage. And Alex could feel the weight of that story because it showed not only resilience but ingenuity. And he understood that humans always found a way to survive and to turn the impossible into victory. He spoke of a human named Megan, who had guided children through war zones and had protected them at great risk to herself. And he said that even the smallest humans could display courage that rivaled the strongest soldiers of his species, and that the galaxy had never seen anything like it, because humans combined courage, hope, and intelligence into actions that could never be predicted or contained. And Alex nodded quietly because he realized that these were not just stories but lessons about the nature of humans and what made them feared by so many. The veteran continued with tales of humans who had survived capture, who had repaired broken equipment with nothing, who had led units without formal training, and who had saved comrades in situations that others would consider hopeless. And he said that he had learned more from these encounters than from any strategy, manual, or officer's training. And he said that what made humans truly dangerous was their ability to adapt, to endure, and to inspire others even when facing annihilation. And Alex understood that humans were not simply soldiers. They were living forces that reshaped any battlefield they entered. He told Alex that the Empire had underestimated humans for too long, because they judged them by size, by weapons, by numbers, and by reason alone. But humans had no such limits, and they used every disadvantage as an advantage, and every error by their enemies as a lesson. And he said that he had seen entire fleets falter when humans commanded even the simplest forces with cunning and determination, and that their willpower alone often turned defeat into victory. And Alex felt a chill, because he realized that humans were the embodiment of endurance and unpredictability, and that the galaxy could never fully control them. The veteran spoke of nights when humans had sung in the dark, when they had laughed after impossible victories, when they had worked together to heal and to protect, and he said that even in moments of rest, humans carried a strength that others did not understand, and that it was not only their courage but their spirit that made them invincible in a way that no weapon could match. And Alex sat silently listening to every word, and he understood that this was the chilling truth about fighting humans, because it was not only about facing their weapons or tactics, it was about facing their unyielding will and their endless endurance. Finally, the veteran leaned back and looked at Alex and said that humans were not perfect, that they made mistakes, that they suffered loss and pain, but that every hardship shaped them and made them more formidable. And he said that he had learned to respect them not only as soldiers, but as a force that could never be fully predicted or defeated. And Alex realized that every encounter carried this lesson, and that the galaxy had underestimated humanity at its own peril. And he felt pride swell in him, because he knew he belonged to a species that could endure, adapt, and rise again no matter what the universe threw at them. The night ended with the veteran silent, watching the stars, and Alex understood that the story was more than history. It was a warning and a lesson that humans were not to be underestimated, and that their courage, spirit, and resilience made them forces that could shake the galaxy. And even in quiet moments, their presence carried a weight that no other species could match. And Alex left the observation room with the memory of the veteran's words. And he knew that the chilling truth about fighting humans would stay with him forever, and that one day, when the galaxy tested them again, humans would rise as they always had, and nothing could truly stop them.